So I was saying it is hard to follow on this one. I don't have humor in this presentation, but I have a lot of irony. And let me explain that irony in 2-3 instances, 2-3 examples that as Indians we have often heard. And that's how I'm going to be broadly building what I'll be discussing today. We've often heard that Indians are dirty. India is a dirty place. But surely this might not be right, because some of the cleanest houses that you and I have gone to are Indian houses. We actually take our slippers off before entering into houses. Houses in slums are also extremely clean. But the idea that Indians are dirty people has persisted for so long, and sometimes we occasionally also, knowingly or inadvertently, engage with it, agree with it. We're also told that Indians are lying and dishonest people. It's a corrupt country. They're very dishonest. So be careful when you deal with an Indian. But at the same time, we know that more than 90% of our workforce is informal in nature, that lies outside the standard contract and property rights framework. Many of your lawyers, you would know this. In other words, in India, everybody does businesses on word of mouth. A dishonest group of people can't do businesses on word of mouth. We've also been told Indians are superstitious, they're absurd, their cultures and customs simply don't make sense, they're all illogical customs. But these very Indians run banks, take spaceships to moon, run major organizations, teach in top universities. Surely there must be something going on here. The two things don't coexist, and these ironies are something that we have hardly engaged in. So what I'll do today is these stereotypes. So what I'm going to do is, let's keep in mind these stereotypes, and over the next 15-20 minutes, I will try to show you where these stereotypes are located. Where do these stereotypes really come from? What are the sources and origins of this framework from where we think we can carve out stereotypes about a certain society, a certain group of people? In which I'm going to squarely blame the British literature, the colonial literature, by and large carried in these books or volumes called the gazetteers. So a very quick show of hand before I take you through what I have. How many here have heard the word gazetteer? Not the gazette, not the gazetted officer. That's not the word I'm talking about. I'm talking about another word, which is slightly different, gazetteer. I think it's mentioned in here. Okay, only one. So here's an interesting thing. This is how, gazetteers are nothing but books. These are massive volumes of documentation that the British did on India, on Indians. So think about it like a huge knowledge repository. Here's a DM or a collector who has been sent from England, mostly actually from Scotland, to run a city larger than the size of London with hardly any accountability, to an alien race, so to speak. And this person has no idea who is he, typically it was a he, going to govern. And so you read this text, which is written by another British, another group of colonial scholars who have written in detail about India, about that region. So you have gazetteers of India, and most of this actually really took place during the anthropological turn of the early to mid 19th century, when Europeans were documenting natives everywhere in the world. The interesting thing about India, however, is that by many accounts, India is probably the most documented place by any colonial power anywhere in the world. Those are some of the more recent, there's very little documentation that we ourselves have done as much during that time. So most of the literature that we have about India during the 19th century comes from gazetteers. So you have gazetteers of the country, gazetteers of regions, and also gazetteers of districts. At some point, perhaps, after the presentation, I'm happy to show you some or take you through some of them. But these gazetteers were therefore the primary source of information that the British had about the natives, which was written by the British and continuously updated. After 1871, of course, the census also started. How did these gazetteers look like? So this is, let's say, the table of contents of Kangla Gazetteer. Kangla is a district in Himachal Pradesh, of course, and the list of this table, of this list of contents, tells you the details with which they went. It's almost 300 pages on Kangla alone. And when was this written? This is 1884. So if you really want to find out what was going on in Kangla in 1884, this is the most authentic source. These sources are generally considered to be so authentic that even in the Ayodhya Babri Masjid case, the judges had to refer to Faizabad's gazetteer, because this is some account which is documented by somebody who was here 100 years ago. These gazetteers are actually the source, the primary source of historical knowledge that we have about the colonial project, as well as the colonial administrative design, in addition to the imagination of how Indians were and who Indians were. And that is why they become extremely important, at least for the purposes of today. So if you look at section C, caste and tribes, which is where we can go deeper into today, you have statistics of distribution of tribes and caste, proprietary importance of different castes, different kinds of castes and their explanations spanning across around 20 pages. These were impressions that the British carved out of all these different castes and communities across India. And I'm going to now take you through some of the primary sources of how British wrote about us. And slowly it will start making sense to us, why do we have stereotypes about India, Indians, castes and communities about India, and where are they really located in? It's a larger enterprise, but I'm going to give you a snapshot of it. Darjeeling Gazetteer 1907. This is just another example of how much detail did they go, in addition to, of course, engaging with health, engaging with history, engaging with agriculture, public administration, taxes. So there are all kinds of details, but a very important chapter was this on people. Yavatmal Gazetteer, look at the list of castes that they have mentioned. And engaging with each of them extensively. Again, Aurangabad's Gazetteer, 1884. Religion of Hindus, language of Hindus, literature of Hindus, religion of Mohammedans, language and literature of Mohammedans. These are just table of contents, just a quick snapshot. But let's look at now, just give me a second, yeah, okay. So this is the Gazetteer of Bombay, a particular edition where they're talking about people in Bombay, 1884. This is what they say about Koli communities. The men smoke hemp flower or ganja and tobacco and drink hemp water or bhang, but the women as a rule hold aloof from all intoxicating drinks and the drugs, though they eat flesh and chew tobacco with betel and lime. The next one, Mahadev Kolis are an agricultural people and as a rule are fairly hardworking and diligent husbandmen. Though quick and shrewd, Kolis are neither such steady nor such intelligent workers as Kunbis, being often lazy and wanting in forethought. Ahmednagar Gazetteer continues. Still among them are unsettled, this is again for Kolis, still among them are many unsettled disorderly spirits who leave their homes on slight provocation and are easily persuaded to gang robbery. So in some ways, this community can be easily persuaded into gang robbery. But their fellow villagers, they are kindly and ready to help, and in criminal cases, when not tutored, are notably truthful. So they're also making truth claims about how truthful these community members or people in this community are. Kolis as a class are poor, and Forest Conservancy has pressed somewhat severely on their limiting their supply of brushwood and leaves for dali cultivation. Ramoshis, another community found in, and I'm going to talk about these communities a little later, but read the portion highlighted in yellow. Ramoshis, there are a few Ramoshis, blah, blah, blah. They are dark Telugu race and were formerly of predatory habits. Continues in another gazetteer in Aurangabad. The Mathuras are tolerably clean, but the Charan and Lamana women seldom change their clothing till it is tattered and torn when it is renewed by a fresh suit. Let's go to the northeast, Darjeeling. The Bhotia communities, the Lepcha communities. I don't know if you can, I think you can read it. As a race, the Bhotias have been described as rude, turbulent, and quarrelsome, but this seems to be an unfair estimate of their character, blah, blah, blah. And then they are not so pushing as the Nepalese, nor so law-abiding as the Lepchas. And finally, inordinate love of gambling, blah, blah, blah. Lepchas, well, on the page on the right, this is Darjeeling Gazetteer 1907. For generation past, a conquered race, they are timid people, peaceful and no brawlers. A kindly, placid, somewhat indolent people, they are being largely supplanted by the pushing, self-assertive Nepalese, and in consequences are losing their best land in the district. Bhils and Banjaras, who are often mentioned as Banjaris in these gazetteers, Aurangabad Gazetteer 1884 on the left and Khandesh Gazetteer on the top 1880. Khandesh is the region in north of Maharashtra. The Bhil tribes, the love of plunder and disorder. Ignorance, carelessness, and love of liquor have, especially in western Khandesh, sunk many of them deep in debt to the astute Gujar Kunbis. The portion circled. They were hair-long and fairer skinned than the Bhil or the ordinary Kunbi. They have as a rule regular and white teeth, blah, blah, blah. Their women, though some are pretty enough, are by no means cleanly. They never bathe more than once a week, and their oiled and plaited hair is constantly filled with dirt and dust, while their tears of bracelets and anklets keep them from cleaning their limbs. Their petticoats are seldom washed and look much like well-worn quilt. Continuing in Khandesh Gazette in top right, Bhils in general are of small stature and are of active habits, but some are tall and well-made. They are not steady at work and are ignorant, fitful, careless, and extravagant, though simple, thoughtful, and honest. And then their languages. I also pulled out the Fulkian Gazetteer, which consists of Fulkian was this kingdom which had a number of districts in India, in Rajasthan and Punjab, including Patiala. So if you want to read about Patiala, 1904, I don't know if this, yeah, you can read a few members of the following tribes are addicted to the crimes noted against each. 6 jats, dacoity, robbery, housebreaking, distilling illicit liquor, and trafficking in women. Hindu jats of Banger, cattle stealing and receiving. Mohammedans and Hindu Rajputs, cattle theft and receiving. Sonars, Chohars, and then you continues with Sansis, Borias, Bilochis, Minas. It goes on and on. In fact, if you read at Sansis, it says housebreaking, highway robbery, dacoity, theft of standing crops, and corn from stacks. If I move away from gazetteer, you will find these instances, and by the way, this is just a snapshot. You'll find these instances replete across gazetteers, but also in a large amount of colonial literature. So think about London News, 14th November, 1857. This is just about a few days after the official, official closure of the first war of Indian independence. And there is an image at the bottom of which is written, and I've expanded at the top, Hindu thugs and prisoners. This was a major project called The People of India. I think it was the 2nd edition. While at Meerut, I was glad of the opportunity afforded me by Lieutenant Chamberlain, agent for Thuggy and Dacoity, with a capital T and capital D, and bothered to the Journal of Companies, Troops, etc., etc. Thuggy and Dacoity with a capital T and capital D. So that means these crimes are now proper nouns. They are no longer just stealing and thieving. This is 1857, long before British had gone. And you can only imagine what would have continued after this. I'll just switch it from the. Okay, yeah. Harper Weekly, just a few days later, a party of thugs in India. If you engage with historical archives, you will realize there are a range of such images and imageries that are routinely produced in the colonial literature in order to convey a certain image of what Indians are and how they are, or certain communities and how they are. The People of India, again, 1869 project, Bania, Hindu tradesmen. And the portion highlighted in yellow talks about the Bania. If he has cheating propensities and indulges them to the utmost of his power, the Bania is a useful person. Sort of continues from somewhere. All right, so there is some humor in it indeed anyway. The Gujar landlord. Gujars are much addicted to smoking, particularly ganja, the prepared leaves of hemp or cannabis sativa, and blah, blah, blah. In fact, I pulled out Karnal's Gazetteer of 1892, and you read the portion mentioned that is highlighted in the red box. The Gujars are a notorious thieving tribe, and as a rule, their cultivation is of the most slovenly description. Though in many of the Khadir and Kanal villages, they have really applied themselves in earnest to agriculture. They have a habit of breaking up far more land than their numbers allow. You will see such instances over and over again, repeated across gazetteers, across communities. Now this is interesting, by the way. This is interesting on 2 counts. Count 1, the dacoits, the thieves, and the way that the British painted them, we really don't find their accounts during, let's say, Aurangzeb's travels across India. Aurangzeb came as far as Maharashtra, even beyond. So throughout their cavalries, when they're walking through India, we don't see these accounts. But we suddenly start seeing them in British gazetteers. The second count is that when they are trying to document us, are they really documenting us or not? Because surely, what I'm not trying to say is that they were imagining this and writing it on their own. The value judgments, the stereotypes that were argued, that were pushed forth, are the value judgments that come not because they were writing about us, but they were writing their description, their experience of us. They were not describing Indians, they were describing their experience of Indians. And that is qualitatively different. When I write about you, and when you write about yourself, these two things are entirely different. They will be different, particularly if I come from an extremely different cultural context. And so I'm seeing everything through that same cultural lens where I come from. And so it appears to me that this doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, let me try to put it under a category which I can use pejorative terms or derogatory terms. The impacts are huge. And by the way, even though scholars have engaged with this type of literature and engaged in different kinds of analysis, I think they fall short in really grappling with what we have here. And how do you even address this problem? This is not just their opinion, because it's another thing when you all laugh and when I talk about banyas, but it's one thing when you all laugh when you talk about banyas, but it's another when policies get carved because of these stereotypes, and then they become disastrous. Take a look at this, for instance. I don't know how many of you know, the laws on dacoity and thuggis in India have existed since 1830s. In fact, in 1871, we had the Criminal Tribes Act, which was repealed only in 1949. Which means, so I'll tell you what Criminal Tribes Act was. These are tribes, communities, groups of people who and the local administrator is empowered to categorize or label a certain tribe as a criminal tribe. The moment he or she does it, anyone who's born in that tribe is born with the label of a criminal. Every man of that tribe has to go to the local police thana every week to say that, look, I'm here and I've not done anything wrong. Number of tribes that were criminalized through the British period, 198. Number of people, at this stage, between 60 to 100 million. This is the number of people we are talking about, because of the stereotypes that were generated. I do not have time to get into the idea of why these stereotypes were generated, except for saying that they were generated through British experience of India, not because of India. But the impacts were horrendous. Why were they horrendous? Because even now, and by the way, when Indian government repealed the Criminal Tribes Act 1871, and by the way, 1871 was also the year when we started our census, so enumeration started happening. When they repealed in 1949, by 1952, they started another law, Habitual Offenders Act. And so the stigma that was carved out during mid-19th century, through the mid-19th to the end of 19th century, and in the first half of the 20th century, continues until this day. These are some of the very few newspaper clippings from credible newspapers that I have pulled out, and you will find them happening again and again and again. In fact, the tweet that is mentioned is actually a tweet of a very senior IPS officer. These stigmas don't leave us. It is only human to be prejudiced. But what has century or more than a century of domination by a different culture has done is that we have internalized these stigmas in such a way that they are truths of the world. They describe us what the world is, even when they don't. Remember the 3 descriptions of India that I mentioned in the beginning? And how baseless those descriptions were? Because exactly the opposite is right in front of our eyes. This doesn't mean that the roads in India might not be dirty. Surely they will be. But then that will be true for any other place. This doesn't mean that some community members may not have, some members of some community might be lying or thieving, but that would be true for every community. To create a category out of it and then take them to policy making is where the problem is. How do you handle this? What do you do about it? Well, this is an exercise of knowledge production. Knowledge production creates violence. Any knowledge that we create will kill an old knowledge. This is a new knowledge that was created about India to Indians by somebody else. We have not created knowledge about ourselves. Natives in India were documented by outsiders. And our documentation that we should have done ourselves has never happened. This is the exercise which we are trying to do at the Center for Knowledge Alternatives, where I lead this project in Flame University, where we are going to India district by district. We are doing a pilot in Maharashtra right now, where we are not just documenting about the people by asking people about themselves in the same way that people would think about their own selves, but by also looking at many other facets and characteristics that are important at a local level. So it's not just the culture, the language, the food. It's not just the local history or political history or markets and festivals, but it is also about agriculture. It's also about police and judiciary. It's also about education, health, schemes, environment, labor, industries, so on and so forth, which are quantitative aspects. So think about it, for instance, in your own city, Patiala. How many cars are there in Patiala? How will you find it out? And why should you not be able to find it out at a click of a mouse? What is the type of food that Patiala is famous for? Or for that matter, what is the local politics that exists in Patiala, which could be very different from another place? And so the more local we go, the more decentralized our knowledge creation and knowledge production happens. The higher the likelihood that we will be true and accurate to the reality. More importantly, honest to ourselves. Because if we Thank you so much.